In Pathogene at a chemistry university, students were tasked with writing an essay. I don't remember the topic. Anyway, one of the students, who knew absolutely nothing about the subject, instead of submitting a blank paper, wrote a very detailed story about a lonely dragon who couldn't make friends. The other animals felt very sorry for him and really wanted to be friends with him. But the problem was that when the dragon was happy, he burned everything around him. This whole story took up 3 or 4 pages, after which the story abruptly ended and he finally tried to answer the question. And I'm still concerned about whether the dragon ever found friends in the end. Poor guy, I hope he didn't hurt anyone. How did you grade his work? Did you deduct points for the story? I only evaluated what was related to the assignment. His story didn't affect the grade at all. Name 3 different gases. Answer: air, farts, gravity. Oh yeah, gravity, the heaviest of all gases. On a thermodynamics test, students had to write what an adiabate is. One student answered: a woman who needs insulin. I think I gave half a point for effort. Everyone needs insulin, it's just that diabetics can't produce their own. I remember we had a test on Chinese symbols where we had to write a definition for Tango Fengyu. It's a proverb that roughly translates to, even a school dog can learn to read and write in 3 years. But one student translated it as, if you haven't figured something out in 3 years, you're dumber than a dog. Maybe he did it on purpose. I'm giving an oral French exam. A girl wanted to say, I traveled by plane. But she said, I molested on the plane. We were laughing so hard she had no idea what she said. My first day in Russia, I went to order a medium cappuccino, but I said Wednesday cappuccino. Oops, Japanese test. Instead of answering, the student wrote, I don't know anything, I'm sorry. I didn't study. I've disgraced my whole family and my cow. And next to it she drew the saddest cow you could imagine. Edited. If anyone doesn't know, the family and cow thing is a reference to Mulan, although Mulan was Chinese. Edited 2. There was also an assignment where they had to rewrite Japanese numbers as Arabic numerals, like 1, 2, 3. One genius wrote the whole assignment in Roman numerals. At first I laughed, but then I wanted to kill him. But since the goal of the assignment was to show understanding of Japanese numbers, he did it, even if in a stupid way. I had a student who submitted code to me that had swear words in the comments. I had to have a serious conversation with him about professionalism, only I didn't tell him what a mess the code was in my bachelor's thesis. Not a teacher, but I give driving tests. I ask a question. What is the penalty for not stopping when the police stop you? Students answer, if you drive fast enough, none. 3rd grade, asked students to write definitions of several words. One of the words was parents. Students' definition, adults who own you. Surprisingly, a very deep answer for a 3rd grader. When I taught 1st grade, we learn new words every week. One time we were talking about the word power, and I asked the children to give an example of something powerful. Most of the children answered president and superhero, but one said babies. I was like, why? Babies have power because they can cry and get whatever they want. Looks like someone has a younger brother or sister. Librarian. Who can tell me what Martin Luther King Jr. was known for? Kindergartner. He told people about their colors. When I was in 1st grade. Teacher. What does everyone love George Washington for? Classmate. Because he gives us a day off. My mom used to be a teacher. One day she was testing 7th graders on their knowledge of geography, and she asked what island was considered the largest before the discovery of Australia. One of the kids answered, trick question. Australia doesn't exist. I hope you're Australian. Haha, Australia doesn't exist. But Kevin, we live in Australia. Existential crisis intensifies. Not a teacher. One time I didn't prepare for a test at all. I left almost all the answers blank. The last question was the only one I answered. It asked, what is a haiku? Please write a definition and give an example. My haiku was this. I failed this test. I should have studied better. I hate myself now. My teacher wrote not bad and gave me the maximum score for that question. Then for the rest of the year I prepared normally. Haiku is the most overrated crap in the history of literature. I remember when we were studying haiku, I said, so, is that it? You promised us something grand last lesson, but there's nothing like that here. This form of poetry translates very poorly into English. Believe me, there's a lot more meaning in haiku in Japanese. Question. How do you feel about premarital sex? Answer. I wouldn't buy a car without taking it for a test drive. During an astronomy lecture, our professor asked the hall, how many stars are in our galaxy? No one raised their hand, so he picked some random dude and asked him to answer. He thought for a bit and said, well, at least a couple dozen, right? The teacher sighed sadly and replied, yeah, right. I teach preschool-age children, specifically 2-year-olds. Sometimes I hand them cards with pictures on them, and I ask what's on them. One time they got a card with a gallon of milk. I ask where it comes from. Right away one of my favorites shouts, Mommy, milk comes from mommies. In principle he was right. Giving a biology exam. Topic: Frogs and amphibians. Task: name several ways to save frogs from extinction. Answer: we need to ban the opening of French restaurants throughout the country. Maybe not the most outstanding and effective way to protect frogs, but technically he's right. This was the answer of one of my classmates. When the teacher crossed it out as incorrect, we went to complain so that he would change his decision. Question: can you explain the consequences of the German attack on the Netherlands in 1940? Answer: no. Technically, yes is also correct. In fact, the teacher just worded the question badly. Calculus test. Task: write Simpson's formula. In English it sounds like Simpson's rule. Answer: the student drew Bart Simpson saying, "Don't have a cow, man." Oh, one of my students had a cool answer. Only I'll start with a clarification. In our country, if 70% of the class fails a test, then everyone has to rewrite it. And the better grade from the 2 attempts goes into the gradebook. One time we had a test that everyone failed except for one guy who got a perfect score. Naturally, he couldn't improve his grade when rewriting, so instead of answering he wrote a cheesecake recipe. I didn't hesitate, I made it, and it turned out to be just awesome. What country is that a thing in? I don't know where the author is from, but it was the same in Germany. Although it all changed 5 years ago, I had one professor in college who I hated. When I was taking my graduation exam with him, instead of regular numbers I decided to use Roman numerals. It wasn't easy, but I managed. Shortly after the exam, he sent me an email saying that he refused to grade my work. I forwarded his email to the dean, to which the dean replied that technically Roman numerals are still a viable form of numbering. The professor had to check my work. I got a B. I'm not a professor, but I used to have to check exam papers. I've seen people draw in the answers, write jokes in them, and beg the graders to give them a passing grade. Thanks to such jokes, it wasn't so tiring to check these papers for 12 hours a day. One time someone drew a dinosaur and then tried to erase it. True, it seems that he had a very shitty eraser. The guy almost wiped the sheet into dust, trying to erase the traces of this terribly drawn dinosaur. Another time someone wrote a joke in very small print. There were also cases when people were openly sucking up to me, like, "Listen, you're so awesome that I would gladly bake you a cake. By the way, can you give me a good grade?" Edited. By the way, info for everyone who is in college now. Sometimes all this kind of shit really works. If you manage to appease the evaluator, then he can make you a couple of concessions. My student once raised his hand during a test to ask a question. A hand that was all covered in formulas. My dad once told me that one of his students complained that they hadn't covered what was in the question. The question was, "Can you get pregnant from a handshake?" It was the first year of med school. It's like a trick question. Like, it can't be that simple. There must be some hidden answer. Like, maybe it's still possible to get pregnant under some crazy circumstances. One of my teachers told me that when she was grading a 12th grade exam, one of her students wrote, "I don't know anything about this topic, but here's a bird" instead of an answer, and then drew a really shitty bird. Former teacher here. In general, this is a working strategy. We had certain grading rules, and according to these rules, her student would have received a D or 51%. If he had submitted a blank sheet, he would have received 0%. Is it stupid? Yes, but those were the rules. So draw birds, guys. You never know when it might come in handy. I'll give you an example of my stupid answers. My friends and I had this meme in school, or something. In short, we wrote either 42 or 6 or Jesus for all the questions we didn't know the answer to. One time we had a physics test that I didn't prepare for at all, on which I decided to write these 3 answers everywhere. The funny thing is that I answered one of the questions almost correctly. Where I wrote 42, the answer was 43. So they gave me 1 point for it. As a result, my grade was slightly higher than the minimum. I once wrote Jesus as the answer on a physics test as well. When I got the work back, it was written, "I will accept this answer for the first and last time." Question: who is called the founding father in America? Answer: George Walker Bush. He guessed the George part, I guess. You can give him 1/3 of a point. I'm not a teacher, but I know a guy who misspelled his name on the exam. Also not a teacher, but in 7th grade we had a grammar test. There were 10 questions. You could get 3 points for each. I failed all the questions and forgot to sign the work. I got -3 out of 37. I teach at a school where students learn on iPads, and all the work we have is also written in digital form, respectively. So, on one test, some student inserted a needle emoji instead of an answer. Answer. I don't even remember what the question was anymore, but I remember the answer well. My favorite answer in 20 plus years of teaching. Question. In what year did the American Revolution begin? Answer. In France. I still can't understand what was going on in his head. I didn't even dare to ask him to explain himself. I don't know what the student had in mind, but the sentence he translated it as she was walking down the street with a bearded mattress. Seriously, a mattress. Mattress sailor is not equal to mattress.